Sweet 16, UConn, defend the North, Stores North. You're locked on UConn.
You are Locked On UConn, your daily podcast on the UConn Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in. Thanks for making Locked On UConn your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This episode is brought to you by Nissan. Are you the kind of driver that likes to push things a little further? Ever wonder what adventure could be around the next corner? Take the Nissan Rogue, Nissan Pathfinder, or Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure. Check them all out today at nissanusa.com. Well, the mood of Husky fans is pretty lockstep with some exceptions, and I don't think feeling nerves means you're less confident. Anyone that's played sports at a high level gets that feeling, and it fades pretty quickly. I think most fans are lockstep, and I want to bring in Rocco Miller of The Bracketeer, a brilliant bracketologist. Rocco, I'll ask you, is UConn gearing up to have a game where they put it all together?
Well, I feel like UConn has a game where they put it all together almost every time out. They overwhelm opponents, to a severe degree. I think there's some crazy stat, and if I'm wrong, I apologize. But something like in the last two seasons, they've only had 6 close games, a close game being, I think, 8 points or less. So the majority of the time they're on the court, they are overwhelming people. And I think a lot of that actually has to do with the defensive side of the ball for UConn. I think having Klingon in the paint, obviously him with Sonogo last year, this year, more him as the primary, of course, but Karabon backs him up, and just a lot of size advantages across 1 through 5 positioning. And so UConn, they are able to put teams in droughts. It's so much easier to focus on the offensive part. So I try to look at it the other way, just because I know, like in that Northwestern game, for example, and several other games, there's going to be a long drought that's either coming quickly or eventually. So once UConn has that rolling, then their offense rolls off that as well. It's such a hard team to beat over 40 minutes or even hang with, and that's where they have so many advantages.
No, I think you're spot on. I think the stat is over the last 8 NCAA tournament games, including last year, they've won by double-digit points.
Right,
and also from a neutral site perspective, I think they're 20-1 over their last 21 neutral site games. The last loss came last Big East tournament semifinals to Marquette. Every other game, though, has been by at least 8 points. So you're right on that.
Yeah, and I mean, I think they feel very comfortable in the environment. Dan Hurley's got a psychological edge on his players, if you will, just figuring out weird ways to keep them motivated. Obviously, he's spreading some kind of untrue things, but whatever. If you're a coach and your whole purpose is to get your team to win, I can get behind that 100%. And
yeah,
and when you're winning all the time, you kind of start running out of material if you're Dan Hurley, don't you?
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think look, coach speak is one thing. Motivational kind of leadership, kind of showing that united front is another. So I'm with you there. I think Dan really tries to kind of get into the psychology of his players and what works. Right, this team needs the chip on their shoulder, because if left to their own devices, these kids are. I think we have a couple older guys in Cam and Tristan at 23, 24 years old. But for the most part, this is a pretty young team. If you let young kids to their own devices, and they start looking at podcasts like this or other areas where they're being told how great they are, what's worth going out there? You know what I mean? Like you kind of need that person to kind of keep you on the straight and narrow. So I definitely feel like Dan is using that to their advantage. You touched on their defense, and it is easier to kind of just talk about the offense. But we did do a whole show with Michael Cohen, who wrote about how intricate this offense is from Fox Sports. Have you ever seen a more intricate offense at this level in your time covering basketball?
Well, there's the best thing about college basketball as a whole is I think you get such a variety of styles and ways to create shots and looks or get the post involved all the time, different ways to get the ball into the post. So based on your personnel, I think there's all types of offenses that are very interesting. But I think what UConn's done so well. Like, I've heard some of what Cohen has had to say before, and he's right. Like, I think what they do is they create a variety of weapons through different ball movements and screens, and it's an easy way to create baskets. And the opponent has really, when you have a threat at all 5 positions, the opponent has to kind of respect everything you run, and they can't really collapse or double as much as they probably want to, and take certain players away because everybody is a threat on UConn. And so I think that makes it super difficult to defend. So it'd be impossible to argue that it's not the best, but at the same time, it's, there's so many other unique offenses you can watch in the country as well.
No, I agree. I think what we love about it at UConn is there was a lot of dark days before Dan Hurley took over and really kind of made this shift of, listen, man, I remember games in 2017, 2018, 2019 where you're struggling to get 60 points on a good night. So I think that's it's also such a breath of fresh air for UConn fans to look at this from that perspective. So I think that's where we may inflate it because we're fans, but it's also we're coming from a place of, iso ball and pick and roll where there's not a lot of pin downs, there's not a lot of flare screens. So that's part of it.
Yeah, it's aesthetically pleasing, if you will. So it's easy to get behind that. I mean, if you watch the Alabama Grand Canyon game, for example, that was the opposite of aesthetically pleasing from a basketball sense. It was more of a UFC fight and a lot of ISOs and a lot of bloody lips. I appreciate that to a degree, but I know the common fan, you would love to see good ball rotations, high percentage looks, feed your post, a little bit more traditional, good spacing. Those are the things that are really wonderful, rhythmic offenses.
Yeah, and I think the interesting part is, I'd love to hear your take on it, is even though UConn does try to run a little bit and get out in transition, they actually play at a medium style pace. They don't rush it. A lot of their sets are 15 to 25 seconds. They don't freak out in the half court if the clock is winding down. What do you make of that? Do you think that's, again, just that constant motion where there's options everywhere, whether it's backdoor screens or however Dan kind of structures and Luke kind of structures the offense? Do you think that is about the personnel choices, or do you think that's just the way the offense is run?
I think it's a combo, and it's interesting because right now UConn is 317th in tempo out of 363 Division I teams. So they're on the low end, and holding the ball, they're at 294, so pretty much in that 300 range. And I think a lot of that has to do with your personnel, but also, like you said, the offense itself. But you have to have maturity and high IQ. In my experience, again, I haven't had the opportunity to have UConn up close in a live environment this year, but I can just tell from watching a number of their games, of course, that they are completely poised, confident in what they're running, that they're going to be able to generate a good basket. They don't have to take that early look in the shot clock. And I think the other part of it is too, let's be honest, when you're up by 15 plus in the second half, you're of course wanting to get the game over with. So why not waste more clock in the second half? So I think that's also contributing to the metric. But I think in general, they prefer to make the other side of it is make the other defense defend for most of the shot clock. Over the course of 40 minutes, that's going to wear them down, which is, of course, going to lead UConn to where they usually end up with that big run or the opponent having the big drought. They're equally the same. And by the end, you've got a nice, comfortable win.
Well, listen, man, from your lips to God's ears for tonight. So we're going to talk about more of that and also really kind of give you the San Diego State side of things after this. This week's March Madness Bracket Highlight is brought to you by our friends at Nissan. Each week, we're picking one team that stands out, a team that pushes it further than the rest. Just like any of the all-new 2024 Nissan SUVs, these guys are able to take it to the next level. The Iowa State Cyclones can only be described as a pathfinder. They've been thrilling to watch and have really created a lane for themselves, entering the tournament as one of the hottest teams in the country. They have a date with Illinois this Thursday in the Sweet 16. Take the Nissan Rogue, Nissan Pathfinder, or Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure. Shop NissanUSA.com. Bracket already busted? Tired of the same old daily fantasy grind where you make a roster, cross your fingers, and hope for the best? Are losing in the last leg of your pick'em entry? Introducing Better Together, the first cooperative daily fantasy platform where teamwork triumphs over talent and you can play with your friends, not against them. Pick more or less on real-time player stats, strategize with your partner to boost your odds, and climb the leaderboard together. So grab a friend and join the social daily fantasy movement. Download Better Together now from the App Store and sign up using the promo code Locked On for a chance to win your share of over $1,000 in cash prizes. Remember the code Locked On because winning alone is fun, but it's better together. All right, Rocco, talk to me about this San Diego State team. What's the answer to playing this UConn offense from San Diego State's perspective? How are they going to attack? How are they going to stop it? And then we'll go on the defensive side. How's San Diego State going to score?
Yeah, well, I think San Diego State's going to struggle to score, as they have in several years past. I mean, you can't help but think about last year's title game just from a schematic standpoint. I get that there are several new pieces this year, Ledee being the big one, their key player, and he's a physique monster, 6'9", 240, but he kind of appears as a little bigger because he's just so physically strong. He's not going to get pushed off the block. He's going to create problems for UConn's offense at points in times, depending on, I think what UConn will try to do is a lot of possible pick and roll actions. And actually San Diego State, when they've lost games, have struggled against that. So I think you'll see Klingon as the roller quite a bit. We'll see if Ledee's going to be the primary defender on that, or if they'll give those responsibilities to maybe like a Jay Powell. But Jay Powell is not a guy offensively that brings a lot to the table. In fact, he's, I was never even that impressed with Jay quite personally when he was at Campbell. And so, yeah, from a schematics standpoint, I think UConn's just got so many things they can throw at them. They can attack San Diego State's biggest weakness in the games they've lost. And again, San Diego State's been an awesome program, deserving of everything. Because they're a Mountain West team doesn't mean you should overlook them. They're right. They're the class of the league. There's no doubt about it. They play a physical brand of basketball, top 10 defensively. But at the end of the day, it comes down to what you're going to run and how you're going to execute. And I do think UConn showed us in the title game last year. They have a lot of different ways they can beat the Aztecs and make it look ugly. That game was not competitive until about, 5 minutes to go when it got cut down to 6. But it was
5, right? Yep.
Yeah, but most of the game, all people were tweeting about was how ugly the title game was. And I don't know if San Diego State's done enough this year. In fact, you could argue they're a little bit worse this year to make up for some of that gap. Whereas UConn's kind of stayed the same. They're now. I don't know if you've seen, but in all the metrics now, UConn's actually passed Houston as the number 1 in everything. So. Yeah. If anything, UConn's even better. So I'm having a hard time. But I think, San Diego State as a whole, just as a West Coast guy who's covered them, Lamont Butler's still there. Damian Trammell's still there. 2 terrific guards. Reese Waters came over from USC this year, had a decent year. Micah Parrish is still there. He was there last year. And then Ledee's the big X factor who basically filled in for Keyshawn Johnson / Nathan Mensah role. And offensively, he's given the Aztecs a huge jolt. Probably deserved to be first-team All-American. I think he landed on second-team All-American, if I remember right. But I think the difference on defense is you don't have a Mensah anymore. Mensah was their big rim protector stopper, and that means, I think even more opportunities for UConn in this game than last year's game.
Yeah, no, I think that's an interesting point about losing Mensah, and obviously – the personnel is different. I think in yesterday's show, I was solo and I kind of did a breakdown from my perspective of some of the tape I watched, some of the games, some of the metrics. I did mention San Diego State I think San Diego State is 1 ahead of UConn on the defensive side. They're 8th in Ken Pom and UConn is 9th on defense. So yeah, I don't think anyone's overlooking them because of the Mountain West. I think UConn has had such a dominant year that this could be another Big Ten team. This could be an ACC school, and UConn is still going to be favored by double digits, number 1. And number two, I think people look at this one, and I made this point. If you look at San Diego State's record, even just their biggest win out of conference this year was, I believe, against Gonzaga, right? And that was earlier in the year when Gonzaga was struggling. So the interesting outlier for me about San Diego State, and correct me if I'm wrong, is they really are about a 30% 3-point shooting team. So that Yale game that we just saw was the outlier. It's not the norm. So I think any UConn fan that's freaking out about their 13 threes in that game really needs to pump the brakes, and that's not who San Diego State is. If they are that, then it's going to be a crazy hell of a game.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that had to do with Yale. First of all, Yale was undersized, so San Diego State had matchup advantages pretty much across the board. And we're able to also generate a lot of open looks because Yale plays a wide open style of play. So a whole different matchup here. NCAA tournament is always about matchups. And that's why filling out brackets is hard for guys like me. But I think San Diego State, if you're looking for reasons to be concerned, that Yale game did give them confidence. So they also came into this same round last year, played the number 1 overall team, same situation, had to go to Louisville and play against Alabama. Alabama had national championship aspirations. They had a dominant big man in Brandon Miller, and San Diego State bloodied the game up. The difference there is Alabama was a 3-point dependent team and ended up going 3 for 27. If at any point Alabama hits 7-8 threes in that game, they're probably getting just enough to win. And on top of that, with about 5 minutes to go, Alabama had the lead, even after shooting that poorly. But San Diego State closed them out. So I think as a program, with a lot of these guys back, of course, Butler and Trammell was the MVP of that game. He had 21 against Alabama that day. They'll have a certain level of confidence that they can do it. However, this UConn animal is a whole different beast than what Alabama brought last year, as great as Alabama was. So I just think as a program, San Diego State's not going to duck down from the moment and, of course, have a little bit of the revenge factor. But I think when it comes down to it, so you might see an interesting start is what I'm getting at. I think we might see a little bit of a sparring match for 10 minutes.
Sure.
And then as the game flow starts to get comfortable, the nerves wear off. I think that's where UConn needs to really start taking over.
Well, are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN or your TV all day? Have to turn that volume down while they're shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel. Program for you every day to bring your biggest stories without all that screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news. Streaming 24/7 on YouTube or free Amazon TV channel app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Before we get to the next segment, Rocco Miller of The Bracketeer, why don't you give us an idea of where you can find your stuff? And then I'm going to ask you one more question on San Diego State before we get to the next segment.
Okay, let's do it.
So where can we find, obviously people who are watching this are big UConn fans, basketball fans. You run a site, thebracketeer.org.
Yep.
Am I saying that right? Can you tell people where to find it? What else you do?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, bracketeer.org is kind of the heartbeat of the year-round clock for me, a full-time focus on the NCAA tournament for 365 days. Really, the key to getting to the tournament is having a strong schedule. So throughout the offseason, I'm consulting several of the teams that I think will be in the tournament, and then it took on a life of its own after COVID. So I'm pretty much helping teams in all 32 leagues at different levels put their schedules together in a way that ideally is helpful for their chances, and also just educating those programs on what it takes to be selected as an at-large. So my work really kind of hits not necessarily the Big 12 or the Big East that often. It's more along the lines of the Mountain West, the West Coast Conference, the American, the Atlantic 10, et cetera. My point is, if you care about non-conference schedules throughout the offseason, keep your eye on the website. We're going to have a page for every conference with all the up-to-date information. Also, a lot of Easter eggs, stuff that's not public yet will be in there. So it's a great place to follow for that. And then, of course, during the season, our work is now done for this year, but consistent bracket projections. So at bracketeer.org, I've been able to establish a foundation of consistent accuracy. According to Bracket Matrix, now the 9th most accurate bracketologist, but I've probably been doing it the longest out of anybody in the top 10. So it's a consistent model of education and forecasting. And I really appreciate the bracketing process too, because I know fans want to know, hey, if I'm a UConn fan, this year was not hard. You knew you were going to Brooklyn and Boston. But in the year like last year, if you're a 4 or 5 seed, you have all these different scenarios. Are we going here? Are we going there? Who are we playing against? What are the types of teams we might be paired against? That's where you can learn a lot from my site as the year goes on. So that's the bedrock. But beyond that, we have a Fielding the 68 show on Field of 68 that's gotten very popular. That is January through March, Mondays and Fridays at 5:30 Eastern. Keep that in mind for next year. And beyond that, my Twitter account at Rocco Miller 8. I'll keep everybody abreast of what's going on because I'm constantly on the move with new ideas.
Sounds good, my friend. I have one more question, and listen, I've known Rocco now for a few years via Twitter, now X, and have consulted with him in the past on some smaller conferences that I was covering. This is obviously a new endeavor with me on more of a fan-led podcast, being a UConn fan for 30 years, 40 years. But I've always appreciated Rocco's perspective, so he gets a gold star for me. I always look for him first versus some of the kind of more well-known bracketologists who we won't name at the moment. So I feel like it's been a long time coming to get on a podcast together. So I really appreciate you coming on.
Anytime.
So yeah, man, I have one last question. Give me like a 30-second rundown. Outside of LeDee, who is the X factor that you think would have to have that game to kind of push them, to that level of where they could win the game, or at the minimum keep it, shot for shot?
I think it's Darian Trammell probably, because he has a knack for scoring. I think at San Diego State he's relegated to the 2 or 3 option on a possessional basis. But don't forget at Seattle U, he was a rock star scorer, and he can heat up in a heartbeat. I'm originally from Seattle, so I followed Trammell's career. It was a big pull when San Diego State landed him 2 years ago. Of course, now made the championship game and the round of 16 here this year at least. So I would watch out for Darian Trammell. As a small 5'10" lightning rod, but you can't forget about him. And he's an extremely confident player. Classic guard. Once a shot or two goes in, he can really get rolling. He was the hero last year when they beat Alabama as well. So he's my pick if anything keeps the Aztecs around for 40 minutes.
Gotcha. That's a good one. I think I'll be keeping our eye on him tonight. So we'll talk about more of Rocco's predictions with a special guest after this. And we're back. The Fire TV stick was my first intro into streaming, and Fire TV is now your destination for sports, for live games to highlights to in-depth analysis. Fire TV offers amazing viewing experiences with smart TVs, as well as the Fire TV stick that you can plug into your existing TV that provides access to millions of shows, movies, episodes, all free, whether it's opening weekend for baseball, like it is today, opening day, or college basketball tournament, Sweet 16 tonight. You're going to want to have Fire TV. Fire TV recently created Fire TV channels to deliver a constant supply of the latest videos from your favorite sports brands, all for free. That includes all of us at Locked On and most of the big pro leagues, college references as well. Fire TV channel lets you dive into all the game analysis, highlights, and more. Keep up to date on all the latest in the world of sports and March Madness. Rocco, your predictions are, you said you were in the 9th overall, or maybe even better than that when you kind of look at the metrics. What's the best you've ever done in predicting a bracket before it came out? What year?
Yeah, just in terms of bracketology, forecasting the selection committee.
Yep.
Yeah. So I think last year all the scores were up. So the way they graded on Bracket Matrix is kind of the way we talk about rankings. And it's an interesting metrics they use to put the scores together. So you get points for, of course, getting the team in the field. That's pretty easy. Then getting them seated correctly is the next stage. That gets you an extra point. And then if you were within one or not seated correctly gets you maximum points. And if you're within one, you also get a point for that. So last year, all the scores were up. So it was easily my highest scoring year, but I think it was the case for most. I was 375 points last year, which was, I don't know, tied for 7th or something like that. And then
Impressive.
in terms of, yeah, it's impressive to a degree, right? Because we argue with the committee too. So if we think the committee's wrong, we don't necessarily want a good score. But of course, I'm really competitive with it, and the mission I'm on is to provide fans with the most accurate information. So I'm taking pride in it for sure. So I appreciate that. And then this year's scores were way down because the Mountain West seeds were all completely out of whack from what we've learned in previous years. We had a few different wild situations with seeding. Clemson was off by 1 and things like that. But I still finished 13th this year at 349. But you can see the big drop off. The winner this year had 355. The winner last year had 380. So scores were down across the board. But the cool thing about the way they do the rankings is it's kind of on a curve, like if you're in class. So my overall ranking went up to the top 10, and that's based on a 5-year rolling scale. So you have to be doing this for at least, I think, 3 years or more to be ranked.
Interesting.
And that got me into the top 10 for this year. It is what it is. Until I take that 4-letter job from you know who, I haven't reached my goal yet. But we'll keep fighting for it.
I hear you, man. No, I hear you, man. Well, listen, you're our official bracketologist from going forward. But the reason why I ask you that question is because if you haven't noticed, if you're watching on YouTube and you see this handsome gentleman, Nick Fraulino, aka Nicky Brackets. First off, Nick, let me just tell you, man, thank you for crushing my dreams in Little Red's pool. I had to break it to my wife a couple days ago that I am not winning that $1,000 because I don't know how you can lose at this point. Nick is 4th out of 25 million brackets on ESPN's Bracketology, a bracket tournament bracket challenge, and he's crushing everyone in our little pool. So welcome, Nick Fraulino. Am I saying your last name correct?
Yeah, 100%, which is actually a first. So I give you props for that.
Yes. Well, I'm an Italian as well. We got a Rocco in here. We got a Zanetto. We got a Fraulino. All we need is Tony Soprano, and we'd have ourselves, an official party. But no, listen, man, it's amazing. How I really have one question. How in the hell did you do this?
Honestly, I mean, like I just finished up an interview with my local news this morning. Like I told them, I do about 15 brackets a year between ESPN and Yahoo, CBS, the March Madness app on my phone. And this, honestly, the name, you can see the name on the leaderboard. It's my name and then the number 1. It's the first bracket I filled out. The first one is usually the one that I take more seriously. And I don't even know, like they were asking me this morning, like Yale over Auburn. Like, did you actually think that? And I was like, yeah, I said, I can see it happening. I mean, I also went with Yale. I mean, they're in New Haven. I mean, everyone knows us for UConn basketball, but we'll give Yale a little shout out there too. And I don't know, just the main thing that really killed me really was the Oakland over Kentucky. Other than that, I mean, I've since the Oakland versus Kentucky game, I've gotten every pick right since. The whole bottom half of my bracket's completely perfect.
Rocco, so, I'm looking at his bracket right now. I'm going to give you some perspective, okay? In the first round, he lost Wisconsin versus James Madison. That's, nothing. That was a 12-5 game. Oakland, Kentucky. The 10-7 Florida, Colorado. And he lost BYU. That's it. Everything else was 100% correct. And if it wasn't for, you had some bad luck, if it wasn't for the South bracket, you'd have only 2 wrong, really, or 3 wrong. I mean, bro, you're that Purdue bracket and that Houston bracket is what really killed you. So, and killed you is a very, very strong statement.
It's the teams that lost. I had them out the next round anyways. So I was like, it's not really hurting me for points for what my max can be overall when it comes down to the championship, but we'll see.
That's awesome, man. Real quick, you can tell everyone amazing. Now. You asked Rocco's advice before you did this bracket, right? That's what
happened. No way. He's 100 times better than me.
I kind of just went with my instincts, really. I mean, I've done this since I was like 7-8 years old, and I could figure out how to do a computer. I do like 10-15 a year. I print them all out and highlight, and waste all my family's computer ink, and
I love it.
I don't know. It's just something I've always been a big fan of. I mean, I played basketball all through high school and middle school and stuff like that. So, I mean, I've always preferred college basketball over the NBA. So March Madness just makes it better.
Dude, this is so cool. I really appreciate you coming on for a few minutes. Rocco, give me and then I mean, we basically have a panel now. So real quick, around the horn, who's winning in tonight's games? And we'll use UConn and San Diego State last. Let's see. On the docket for tonight. The first game. Who you got in Rocco? I'll go to you first. Clemson versus Arizona.
I have to go with Arizona, but I'm not supposed to pick it. I'm like in a curb street situation here as I'm I'm recording right next to the arena. But
gotcha.
It's fine. I'll say Arizona. I think I'm allowed to since I'm an independent.
Sure. What do you got, Nick?
I'm going to go with my bracket. I'm going to say Arizona. I know Clemson's been strong. They looked real good against Baylor.
Yeah.
Even though they let Kuznar drop about 30. I know that game went to overtime. So I was holding my breath on that one. So
okay.
I'm going to go with Arizona as well.
Okay. Rocco, Alabama, UNC.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a really interesting game, but I do think at the end Carolina will prevail. I think what we're going to end up seeing out of Alabama is they're going to, until they prove me otherwise, their defense has just been atrocious for the last month. The Grand Canyon game was a whole different type of game because of the physicality and how much ISO the Lopes run. But now we're back to a flowing, rhythmic, all five guys can beat you type of offense. I think the key is Harrison Ingram, once again, who it was against Michigan State. And I think there's just too many weapons for Alabama to defend. But I do think you'll get a good Alabama effort on offense.
Awesome. Nick, who you got? Alabama, UNC?
I got UNC. I mean, I know Alabama to start off, they played the 13 and then they played the 12, and now they're going against the 1 and UNC. But I just don't see them being able to shut down North Carolina, really.
Fair enough. All right, last one before the UConn game. Illinois, ISU. Rocco, what you got?
Best game of the round by far. It's very difficult to predict. Iowa State, number 1 defense in the country. Illinois, number 1 offense in the country. Something's got to give when Illinois has the ball. And I think at the end of the day, how interested is Illinois in playing defense? Iowa State, I think, will be go through a few droughts. You saw that in the Washington State game. I think they had a drought in each, certainly in the first half, mini drought in the second half. I think at this day and age, when you have that many pros on a team like Illinois does, I'm going to go with Illinois to just outscore them by just enough at the end. But it's a true coin flip.
For sure. Nick, what about you? Illinois, Iowa State.
I know they always got the saying, defense wins championships, and I know that's what Iowa State's got, but I got to go with Illinois. I think it's going to kind of be one of those coin toss games. It's going to go back and forth the whole game. I mean, Iowa State's opening it up at a 1.5 favorite. So, I mean, it's definitely going to be a close one, but I'm going to go with Illinois.
Love it. All right, last one. Rocco, you're on the hot seat. Connecticut, San Diego State.
I'm not picking against UConn. No, not after seeing that championship game last year. And I know that, like we said earlier in the show, the schemes are going to be very similar. The players are a little different. Until San Diego State can prove they can hang that long, the only way they have a chance is if they can go one TV timeout to the next TV timeout, kind of like a classic first round upset. Like if it was a 14 versus a 3 or a 3 or 4 versus a 13. But there's no way I can predict it until I see it live. But it'd be a heck of a story if it happens.
All right, Nick, I think I know the answer, but UConn, San Diego State.
I am going to go with UConn. Like he was saying after that championship game last year, and everyone keeps saying that this UConn team's better than last year's, and I agree 100% with that. So I'm gonna take UConn.
Well, listen, guys, we're gonna shut this bad boy down. I'm gonna go work the rest of the day and get excited about this Sweet 16 matchup. But I wanted to kind of give you guys a real quick rundown of what's going on in Locked On. They've launched their first ever national sports TV 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV. Locked On Sports Today is here 24/7, covering the top sports of the day local experts of Locked On, plus your national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now and available on the free Fire TV channels app. Guys, this has been another episode of Locked On UConn. I'm your host, Mark Snetto, for Rocco Miller, Nick Fraulino, a.k.a. Nicky Brackets. We will check you next time. I give you guys peace, love, and go Huskies.